Hi everyone, so today I am finally getting around to reviewing The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. A lot of you recommended this to me. I think it was in my first or my second book haul that I ever did on this channel, and I'm so happy that you did because I would probably say that this is one of my favorites, if not my favorite adult novel that I've read in 2012 so far. It took me a long time to read this, almost 3 weeks, which is a little ridiculous considering it's only 300 pages, but I was reading 2 other books at a time, and sometimes I just do need a break from a book. I think I stopped reading it for like an entire week. I'm gonna go ahead and get right into reviewing the book, but afterwards I'm gonna talk about a couple other things just about this channel, such as me making partner and just things like that. The Handmaid's Tale was published in 1985 or 6, I'm not exactly sure, by Margaret Atwood, and it's a dystopian adult novel. It took me so many takes to say dystopian adult novel without stuttering. The story takes place in the not too distant future where, because of natural disasters, and I think it says a war, the US government has been overthrown and has become a theocracy. I don't think it's ever specified exactly which religion is the basis for this theocracy, but it is a Christian religion. All of the laws are based off of the Bible, and they use the Bible as the justification for their morality and for these laws. Probably not surprising because this is a theocracy. Women have no rights. They don't have the right to own property, money, or even have their own name. One problem also in this future is fertility, and most women are not fertile. A lot of the men are not fertile, but they don't really like to talk about that. To sort of rectify this situation, the handmaid system is enacted. A handmaid works for the commander, a high-ranking government official, and his wife, and once a month she has sex with the commander in the hopes that she'll become fertile. Our protagonist, of Fred, is a handmaid, and her name is of Fred because in this society they aren't allowed to have their own names, so her name is based off of that of her commander, so she is of Fred. And all of the other women in the book, like of Glenn, their names are also based off of their commander. The story shifts back and forth between this theocracy taking over the government and her everyday life now that she is a handmaid. And slowly, as you hear about the events leading up to this theocracy taking over and her everyday life as a handmaid, you realize just how horrific and oppressive the society is. Throughout this whole book, there's this intense need for knowledge shared by both of Fred and the reader. Of Fred wants knowledge about where her husband and where her daughter have gone. I think it was her daughter was 5 years old when she was taken away, and of Fred was made to be a handmaid. Also just craves any small bit of knowledge that she can get about the outside world and I think it's called the Land of Gilead, I think. And the reader also just wants this knowledge for what is going on, and that's kind of increased by the fact that the story does shift back and forth, so you're not exactly sure what the society is like until you're maybe 100 or so pages into the book. So the main characters in this book are of Fred, her commander, and his wife, Serena Joy. Every time I heard the name Serena Joy, all I thought about was Sailor Moon because her name was Serena. I think people might have issues connecting with of Fred because she is very emotionally restrained. You can't really see her personality because she's not allowed to act out and say what she thinks as a handmaid, but you are allowed into her head, and I did really grow to care about her. I loved her thought process, and I was so worried that she would just be found out. I won't say found out about what, but I was just so worried for her life throughout the book. I also thought the commander was very interesting for a lot of the book. His character kind of lies in this gray area where you're not particularly sure if he should be looked at as a villain or a savior. He's just somewhere in the middle, and just thought that was really interesting. And Joy is essentially just a bit of an asshole, and there are a couple of scenes throughout the book where I won't say when, but she's pressing her rings very painfully into of Fred's hands, and I just thought that said so much about her character. She's just a very cold-hearted, negative person who's obviously very jealous of the fact that of Fred once a month gets to have sex with her husband. I also should point out the sex scenes in this. They're not extremely descriptive. You don't need to worry, I think, if you don't like reading about them, but they're still just horrible, and every ounce of romance and, actual sexuality has been taken out of the situation. Is very ritualistic and just awful. The actual writing of this book was probably my favorite part. I think people might have issues with it because it is a little bit different in that there are no quotation marks, which if you've read Cormac McCarthy, he also tends to do that, at least in the books I've read by him. There are also a fair amount of run-on sentences, and the story does shift back and forth between the present and the past. One thing I should say about quotation marks, I was reading reviews and a lot of people said they had issues with those, but there actually isn't very much dialogue at all throughout this book. There is some, but it's not as if you're having to track and count who's talking for 4 pages of dialogue. It's really not that hard, and none of those aspects of the writing style bothered me. The favorite thing about the writing of this book would probably be that a lot of the sentences were very beautiful and poetic. I loved the imagery, but those beautiful sentences would be intertwined with very acerbic, horrible events that happen in just very quick sentences. I can't say any of them because that would give things away, but All I'll say is the first sentence you read when you find out that the scene where Fred and the commander are having sex, you'll understand what I'm saying. For a lot of the book, it almost has this slightly disquieting, dreamlike quality to the writing, and then she just hits you with these horrible events and stark sentences, and it just kind of shifts you back and makes you realize how horrible her situation is. One thing I also should point out, a lot of people may be offended, particularly if you're religious or if you're conservative right-wing, by this book, not just by the events, but the overall message. I don't think that the point of this book was necessarily to denounce religion and say how horrible religious people are. I think the message of this book was more so to express the reasoning for religion and law to remain separate and for morality to not be solely based upon religion. Do I think that if, say, a Rick Perry type were elected to be president of the United States, this would happen? No, but I do think it does express to the extremes what could happen if religion and law were intertwined. So I would 100% recommend reading this. I'm going to give it 5 out of 5 stars. I can see how the writing style might bother some people, but personally it didn't leave me confused, and I actually really enjoyed it. I thought it was a nice change of pace.